We must learn great lessons from books that teach truth and pass them on. Carolina Journal opinion editor Ray Nothstine included that statement in his latest column at carolinajournal.com. Ray, you talk about a number of interesting books that conservatives should read and own. Before we talk about some of them, why is it so important to focus on these books?
Well, there's, I think, a deep need to focus on the past, and I think a lot of these books bring out truths of the past. I mean, I started out with David Hackett Fischer, who's a historian. A lot of people may not know him because David McCullough might be bigger, but he wrote a book. You know, a lot of people talk about McCullough's book, but you know, Hackett Fischer wrote a really good one called Washington's Crossing. So 1776 is McCullough. Washington Crossing is the same year, and I think it's a book that kind of goes a little bit deeper into revolutionary truths, revolutionary thought. Of course, he goes into John Witherspoon quite a bit, who is a Presbyterian minister and signer of the Declaration of Independence, also serves on the battlefield in that battle there right after the crossing. So there's just, I think, interesting truths that you can draw out from history that are relevant today. And I think that's important that we be grounded in some of these past truths and some of these past things that happened in our country, really to speak, I think, to what's going on today, or else you kind of get lost in the shuffle.
After you introduce David Hackett Fischer, you have a very interesting line saying that at least collectively, we no longer have a reverence for the past. Conservatives must change that trajectory, and one of the best ways is through championing great books. That sounds like an important
right, and I mentioned the book Ideas Have Consequences by Richard Weaver, and so we see, and he talks about the importance of the reverence of the past as well in tradition, but we see today this notion of just tearing down statues, or really Weaver talks about, you know, you're kind of a barbarian if you just focus on specific things in the past for your own agenda, for ideology, which kind of reigns today, and we don't have that. I mean, we have that just sort of on steroids today. And I think it's really incumbent upon us to take in the whole past, to take in the whole history, to have a deeper understanding of it than sort of like the ideologue. And particularly, there may be some of those on the right, but I think it's particularly bad on the left, where you have ideologues picking things from history to support their agenda for today. And I just don't think that that works for a number of reasons.
So you've already mentioned Fischer and North Carolina's own Richard Weaver. Let's talk about some of the other people you reference. One of them, a name that might not resonate with as many people, but this was a man who has a statue at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and his important book, The Passing of the Night. Yeah,
so everybody will know John McCain, the former Republican nominee for president and Arizona senator. Robinson Risner, who was a superior officer to McCain, was in the Hanoi Hilton. One of the Congressional Medal of Honor recipients, if I recall, too, along with Admiral Stockdale. And he suffered horribly, was tortured in the Holoa prison, Hanoi Hilton. And he just wrote, I think, a really important book. They give a testimony, many of these POWs, they give a testimony, I think, along with Solzhenitsyn and people like Andrei Sakharov, Soviet dissidents, about the horrors and dangers of communism. That a lot of people in the West at that time were sort of saying, we're being overblown about this Red Scare or Red Menace. And they really, I think, gave an important testimony with their bodies, with a few of them, with their lives, about the torture and the evil ideologies of Marxism. And they talk about the importance of America. See, these POWs came back, many of them, they came back to a different America that went through this vast cultural change, but they were aviators and trained officers in the military. And so when they came back, they noticed a different America, one that was kind of brooding and doubting much of its credentials. So I feel like these guys have a lot of insights, and there's many accounts that they've written, many of the POWs. One was, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but one was a Texas congressman who died recently. So they offer many accounts, and I think it's just insight because they're able to show that Marxism really is materialism, and they show the dangers of that materialism and what it means for the West. And so they offer this contrasting point to remind America and the Western world of why it's important to believe in your own credentials and not doubt them like we're doing today. I mean, you have so many people doubting the credentials in the West, and because they're not grounded in anything, right? So they have to. There's a vacuum that fills their souls, and so they come up with kind of nonsense.
Your column also references Solzhenitsyn and C.S. Lewis. Let's talk about one other item that you mentioned, and that is, you say that there's hardly any concept today of thrift or stewardship, and then point to the book of one of America's least known but should be more well-known presidents.
Right. I mean, the autobiography of Calvin Coolidge, it doesn't get a lot of attention. It's a little bit has a tone of kind of the dour personality he was known for when he was president. It's kind of matter of a fact book. But what it does is it teaches truths, again, about thrift. I think this is kind of a lost concept today. Calvin Coolidge was famous for when he left office, he sold some of his suits. But he took out his name that were initialed in because he didn't want to profit from the office of the presidency. And now you have presidents who give and I'm not necessarily criticizing this, so to speak, but it's quite a contrast. But you have presidents that'll give a speech for $3, $4, $5 million, right, today, and he didn't want to profit in any way off the presidency. But Coolidge, he's notable because not just for being a president, but he was somebody who talked a lot about thrift. He talked a lot about stewardship at the governmental level, but stewardship in your own personal life too. And to me, that seems like it's lost on a lot of people today. I just don't know. We have a government now and people that say we got to have this, we got to have that, we got to have all these things for equity to reign, to have social leveling, to have people have a chance in society that the government just has to spend. And we almost take that as an automatic that this has to happen. There's really no debate now how we approach a $30 trillion debt, how to rectify that. I mean, I was in the 1980s. I don't quite remember this because I think I was a little bit young in the early 80s when it went over $1 trillion. But I remember things like Graham-Rudman. I remember all these acts about dealing with the federal debt, and nobody's having these conversations today. You have a few people who are talking about default and of that nature, but no one's really talking about really balancing the budget or paying down the debt with any seriousness, at least nobody in Washington. So it's just, I think, an important contrast, like where are we headed? Because if we have hyperinflation or if we print more of our currency, we're going to destroy the middle class, and the middle class is what really gives this nation its kind of bulwark and its strength. And so if you destroy the middle class, then you end up like kind of a third world nation or something. Not to pick on Latin America, but there are plenty of examples where you have lots of poor people and a few rich people. And you don't want a society like that because it's not stable. It's not stable for a republic or a democracy to thrive or survive.
Important issues for our day and for all time, and conservative leaning books deal with all of these issues. The column, once again, at CarolinaJournal.com has the headline, "The Books Conservatives Should Read and Own." It is written by Ray Nothstine, opinion editor at Carolina Journal. Thanks so much.
Thank you.